In the first 10 months of 2022, China-European Union trade value hit over 700 billion US dollars. That's up 6% year on year. China remains the largest trading partner of the EU and the EU as China's second largest trading partner. What do these figures reflect? At the same time, political relations seems to be stable after visits by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and EU Council President to China recently. On the other hand, the European Union and NATO signed a joint declaration earlier this month which says China's growing assertiveness and policies present challenges that needed to be addressed. Is there a gap between political and business discourses on the side of Europe? What might China-EU relations be heading in 2023? Could there be a possible thaw in the stalemate over a bilateral investment deal, which was shelved by the European Parliament after China sanctioned some European persons in response to EU sanctions on Chinese officials over so-called human rights abuse? It's a lot to unpack, so welcome to a special edition looking ahead to 2023, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Brussels by Ambassador Fu Cong, the new head of the Chinese mission to the EU, who just assumed the post in December. Ambassador Fu, thank you very much and welcome to the show. First of all, Happy New Year and congratulations for your new post. Tell us your priorities for the new job and how would you describe your personal style as a diplomat?
First, Liu Xin, good morning to you from Brussels, and thank you for having me on your program. Well, as a diplomat, I use two words to describe myself, if I may. The first one is toughness, and the second one is open-mindedness.
Okay, toughness, that's very serious. Explain a little bit about that.
Yes, when I say I can be very tough, and it means that on issues which relates to China's fundamental interests, for instance, on the issues of Taiwan, I can be very tough. And actually, I've been doing that since I've come here. And I've explained to my European interlocutors that Taiwan issue is a red line issue for China. And the one China policy need to be strictly abided by, and we do not accept any encroachment on that basic principle, which is a political foundation of our relationship with EU and actually with all other countries. And when I say that I can be very open-minded, I mean that actually I can be reaching out and listen, and I can be a very good listener, to put it that way. And since I come here, I've been reaching out to all people, the EU officials and the politicians, and also the academics. And this afternoon, I'm going to meet with the people dealing with tourism. So I'm reaching out to all walks of life, and in my reaching out, I try to explain China's position in a reasonable manner. And also I'm ready to listen to the views and concerns of the EU side so that we can seek a common ground. And that's what I mean when I say that I'm also very open-minded.
So you are assuming this office actually coincides with a very important time milestone, basically China adjusting its COVID policies. A lot of people-to-people exchanges will be stepped up, and looking ahead over the next 3 years for your new term, what kind of difference would you like to make? What would you like to be remembered by when you're looking back at the end of your term? I know you for a long time. I know you have extensive experience in arms control and in public health because you were a former Director General of the Department of Arms Control of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You spent 2 terms in Chinese permanent missions in Europe, one in Geneva, one in Vienna, and you were an advisor to former Director General of the World Health Organization, very wide-ranging. So What kind of difference would you like to make with the kind of extensive background you've had in diplomacy and in public outreach as well?
Actually, there are two things I hope I can make a difference on. One is the what I call the political environment, the atmosphere. Because we have to acknowledge that recently the political atmosphere, especially on this part of the world in Europe, vis-a-vis China, has not been very favorable. And so I need to reach out, as I said, and explain China's position and what we say to tell the Chinese story and to the European audience. And that actually requires sustained efforts, and that requires cooperation from my European interlocutors as well. So that is one area that I will actually hope to achieve something. And the second area, which I hope to achieve, is to have some practical cooperation on the ground, what I call the tangible results. And talking is important, but then those talkings has to be translated into actions on the ground. That's what I have asked my colleagues to identify certain areas where there might be some low-hanging fruits which we can pick as soon as possible in order to really have people see the tangible results of the China-EU relations and cooperation. So these are the, if you like, the two areas that I want to make some progress in. Thank you. Just now you mentioned my experience, indeed. I must say that I have a very strong team in our mission. Actually, we have a lot of expertise. We have expertise in science and technology. We have expertise in public health, in economics, in law, in history, and even tourism and culture. Actually, you name it. We have great expertise in our mission. And so they have been very helpful in explaining the issues to me. And my experience, my past experience has also come in quite handy. For instance, on the issue of public health, just now you mentioned the easing of restrictions on the COVID.
Yeah.
Actually, my experience in WHO have helped me to understand the issue better and have made my arguments with our EU colleagues more convincing, I hope. And also, I know how the organizations in public health area function. So I suggested to my EU interlocutors that they should speak to our people back in Beijing, and also they should listen to the views of the WHO, and in particular the regional office of WHO. So, and that's what they did. So it has been quite helpful. And also in the security aspect, arms control area. And my previous experience have also enabled me to actually to engage with my European interlocutors in in-depth discussions on the security situation in Europe, and especially when the nuclear issues are involved. So all these have been extremely helpful.
But you've never been actually an ambassador to the mission to Europe, let's say, in Brussels especially. What do you potentially see as the biggest challenge, and where do you potentially see you have room for learning something new?
For learning something new, actually I'm learning on a daily basis. So all these issues I need to learn. As I said, I have a strong team. So I am talking to my experts on a daily basis. And also when I talk to the European interlocutors, I learn quite a lot from their perspective. I need to understand what they are thinking on specific issues. I need to understand the strong emotions they have when it comes to the Ukrainian crisis, for instance. And I need to understand the rationale behind some of the measures they have taken. And of course, in the process, I also need to explain Chinese rationale and our rationale for our positions. So this exchange between me and the European interlocutors have been a learning experience for me. The learning, Steve, has been quite steep, I can assure you, but I'm doing my best. But actually, when it comes to the challenges, it's not only my personal challenge. It is, I would rather say that we are actually, the relationship between China and the EU are faced with some challenges. So, but we tend to portray them in a more positive light. So I will call them our hopes towards EU on the how to improve our relationship.
I wanted to ask you exactly this question. I wanted to ask you to feel the temperature, let's say, of China-EU ties, whether there is a fever or whether the temperature is too low and what lies at the core of the problem. Do you think the perception issue is the core of the problem? From your conversation with your European counterparts or from people that you have talked to since entering the new job, do you think that this is where the problem is?
Well, indeed, the perception of China has been going through some changes. We have to acknowledge that. And I'm sure you know that on the European side, they have come up with 3 terms to define the China-EU relationship. One is partnership, another one is competitor, and the third one is systemic rival. So especially nowadays, they tend to emphasize the competition and the rivalry part more. So that's something actually has, in our view, has a dampening effect on our relationship and on our cooperation, actually in all fields, in economics and in science and scientific cooperation. Actually, it proliferates into all fields, as a matter of fact. But actually, when I say that in this process of exchange, I also explain China's perspective. I tell my European interlocutors that China sees our relationship in a more positive way. And as actually President Xi said that China and the EU are 2 major forces for world peace and the 2 big markets for world economy and the 2 great civilizations for human progress. And actually also State Councilor Wang Yi in his written speech also said that cooperation and the partnership are the main theme of the China-EU relationship. So what I'm trying to convey here is that we do not see Europe as a rival, much less an adversary. And we also hope that EU can see China's growth as an opportunity rather than challenges or even a threat. So indeed, that is something that we need to spend a lot of efforts on. And just now you mentioned the challenges. Another thing I want to mention is about this the strategic autonomy.
Right.
EU has been saying that they want to stick to the policy of maintaining strategic autonomy. I think that's very good. And actually, China has been quite open in supporting this strategic autonomy by the EU.
Strategic autonomy means that the EU should make decisions for itself instead of copying talking points from third parties. We all know which party
exactly.
we mean. Yeah.
Exactly. We believe that the EU is an important force in its own right on the world arena.
But Ambassador Fu, some people are saying this process is going to take a long time, if not decades. It will take years until Europe is able to find I always put it where it's mine and it's hard at the same time, in the same place. You know, China trying to explain itself or make it clear that China is an opportunity, not a threat, but EU being divided almost, it seems. On the one hand, they want to do business with China. As I mentioned, businesses with China is very important for the EU. But on the other hand, there are some politicians who are very hostile towards China and who can, for instance, disrupt cooperation between the two sides, the bilateral investment treaty being one example. So how are you going to do your job effectively?
Indeed, that's why I said that there are challenges. And if you ask me in which area I want to make a difference, that is an area that a difference is urgently needed. I would say that. Yes, indeed, the Europe is divided on certain issues, especially if you judge it from the public rhetorics. But actually, what gives me encouragement is that since I've come here, I said that I've talked to politicians, I've talked to officials, and actually, I'm quite encouraged by what they say privately to me. And they say that they will stick to the strategic autonomy, and there will be no decoupling between China and the EU. And so, and they fully understand and respect China's position on issues like Ukrainian crisis and so on and so forth. So I feel that the basic foundation between China and the EU are very good. And we just need to actually tap into this broad, vast reservoir of goodwill towards each other and mutual understanding towards each other. And that's an area that I think is an area that I want to concentrate my work on.
I know you are a very positive thinking person. You highlighted your open-mindedness from my understanding of you. That's very characteristic of you, your style as a diplomat. But are you being too optimistic? I mean, for instance, on January the 10th, the EU leaders and NATO signed a joint declaration which claimed that they live in an era of growing strategic competition and that China's growing assertiveness and policies present challenges that needed to be addressed. Are these just talking points, rhetoric, or will there be specific measures that will be followed? For instance, NATO seems to be looking more and more eastward and acting more and more eastward.
Indeed, actually, that was quite a serious issue. So I would dwell on this first and then expand a little bit later on. On this specific issue, indeed, this is quite a serious issue. This is the first time that China was mentioned in the joint declaration between EU and NATO, and frankly speaking, not in very complimentary terms. And so that's why I made a démarche immediately after their publication. I made a démarche vis-à-vis the NATO and also vis-à-vis EU. And I explained to them that China is not posing any threat to anybody. China adopts a policy of foreign policy of peace, and China's defense policy is defensive in nature. And the fact that China has grown in its capability doesn't mean that China is going to pose a threat to anybody. If anything, China's development of its military capabilities is aimed at maintaining its own, safeguarding its own security. We have not sent warships across the nations to conduct military exercises along other countries' coastlines. We have not conducted reconnaissance flights near the coastlines of other countries. So we are actually developing ourselves to maintain our own interest. If anything, as you said, we are quite concerned about NATO's presence, or the expanded footprint in the Asia-Pacific region. And they have intensified their partnership with some countries like Australia, New Zealand, and closer to our country, Japan and South Korea. Also, in particular, they have established what they called the center of excellence in the cyber area. So between ROK, Republic of Korea, and Japan. So these are issues or developments that are of concern to China. So I made that point very clearly, that NATO, as a regional organization, as a regional military organization, should stick strictly to its own geographical area. So they should not try to expand into other geographical regions. And to EU, again, we appeal to them that they should have more autonomy in military, in the security affairs. I know that military policy is a pillar of the EU's strategic autonomy. So they need to be true to that and implement that on the ground. So these are the messages I have conveyed to NATO and to EU. But if you allow me, this whole concept of China being a threat or challenges to these to Europe, I think is because of this, again, coming back to the perception of China. And they need to understand that, again, China's growth does not pose any challenge, much less a threat to any country. So that's something we need to have make sustained efforts on. We know that it's not easy to change people's perception. But again, as a diplomat, that's my job. I will spare no efforts in reaching out, and I will speak to whoever wishes to speak to me and to engage in discussions and in debates, if they like. And that's why I've been reaching out since I've come here.
I have noticed, I have actually noticed you had a recent meeting with the Deputy Secretary General of NATO a couple of days ago. How significant is that dialogue? You had a certain smile on your face in the picture, which, you know, given the tension, the strong positions China has towards NATO and vice versa, I find it quite unusual. But what happened? What went on in the meeting, and why did you meet that organization face to face?
Actually, we want to maintain constructive dialogue with NATO. That's our position. And the constructive dialogue means that we need to discuss issues in a serious and amicable manner. So that's why the smile on my face. We don't need to always look serious. But when we talk about serious issues, as I said, I can be quite tough. And so you can rest assured that having a smiling face doesn't mean that China is soft on NATO. No, by no means. But let me say again, we want to maintain amicable and constructive relationship with NATO. And in this process, we need to convey the messages clearly that, again, NATO should stick to its own geographical area, and they should not expand its presence in our part of the world in the Asia-Pacific region.
Would there be potential consequences if they do?
Well, we will try our best to make sure that they don't, and we will urge them to be transparent in the dialogue with certain countries, and we'll see how the situation develops and take actions appropriately and in proportion to the actions they take.
Of course, the sticking point in bilateral ties, which is the bilateral investment treaty, which has been shelved, is that one of the lower hanging fruits that you meant? I mean, do you want to be the one that untie the knot?
Well, actually, since I came here, I've been trying very hard to push for the unlocking of this issue, if you like. because you know that this agreement is quite an important one for both sides. This was the result of 7 years of negotiation between the two sides. Both sides have shown great flexibility, and once ratified and implemented, it will greatly enhance our economic interests from all sides. And but the sad thing is that some people, some politicians have politicized this issue. This is an economic issue. So they have politicized this issue, and now this issue is suspending in the air, if you like, in the European Parliament. And because of the sanctions, as you said in your introductory remarks. And I told my European interlocutors that Chinese people are practical people. We want to be practical, and that's why we have come up with a possible solution, which is that we lift our sanctions simultaneously, so as to remove the hurdles to the ratification by the EU Parliament.
What's the reaction from the European side?
The reaction is some people say that this is a good idea, and some people are still thinking about this. So it is on the table, and we sincerely hope that this can be a solution to break the impasse.
Okay. Well,
but there is one thing. There is one thing I need to make clear.
Yeah.
That this is a mutually beneficial agreement.
Okay.
It's not as if it's a favor from one side to the other. People need to realize this, and so that's why we say that in terms of the solutions, it has to come from both sides. You cannot demand concessions from one side only. So that is the basic situation.
Finally, with COVID restrictions being lifted on the Chinese side, now the European Union has issued recommendations about taking some restrictions targeting travelers from China, but not from somewhere else. How is that going to impact people-to-people exchanges? Are you concerned?
Yes, I am concerned. Actually, I also made our views. I also made demarches, if you put it bluntly, vis-a-vis the European side. I talked to the Swedish ambassador in Brussels, who is now the rotating president of EU, and also I talked to the EU officials, and I say that. Those extra restrictions on the part of the EU were not scientifically based. They were not based in evidence, because the basic fact is that the virus variants that are circulating in China are already found in Europe. So there is no point trying to prevent Chinese travelers or impose extra restrictions on Chinese travelers. And I also told them that, that they need to be more concerned about this new virus, which is circulating in the US, actually.
Let's see whether they heed such calls. And basically, the European CDC also gave out similar recommendations vis-a-vis travelers from China. Many thanks to Ambassador Fu Cong, China's new head of the mission to the EU, joining me from Brussels, Belgium. Thank you very much.